introduce someone who rarely gets introduced in the Kehila, because he usually introduces stuff, right? And I think everybody knows David, and he's going to talk today about Heschel. Wait, it's not time yet. Right, sit down. So David is one of the founders of Kehila Chadasha. Is that correct? He's been here forever. He's a holdout from the old days, yet he is still young, okay? And he has the most energy and charisma of, well, he has wonderful charisma that has made every adult and every child who's been in Kehila happy to be here. He also has the energy of at least 4 of the kindergartners compiled together. How's that? You know, I'm impressed. And I know, you know, years ago when Dana was doing her bat mitzvah and she was being tutored by David, I would see his calendar and I could not believe the appearance of it, which was hard to read, but he was always there, and always met every occasion and always made it into a wonderful event. He also manages to turn the most negative events that we've seen in the last decade or two into some reason to be hopeful, and gives us a sense of how we should go forward. So today he's going to talk about Heschel, who, according to the message David sent earlier in the week, was a real inspiration in his own time, and should be an inspiration for us now in our time of trying to figure out what do we do and how do we do it. So David Schneier is here.
Well, that's great. I'm going to give you a hug.
Oh, a hug, okay. Oh, yes. Thanks.
All right. I'm going to put this on. Okay. This is great. Yeah, I think everyone's feeling a little better, you know, a little better. This past the day before the first vote, this is, you know, the healthcare bill. So I was on the lawn there at the Capitol with about 200 other people, mostly clergy. This was a gathering convened by Reverend Barber, okay, from North Carolina, Moral Monday movement, and also founder, I think he's one of the founders, the principal spokesperson for, what's it called? It's called Repair the Breach. Repair the Breach. And this is not the first time that he's gathered people on the Hill. This is the 3rd time that I've been there. And so there were about 200 or so folks gathered, and for a press conference, you know, to speak about how, you know, this horrendous bill that's being proposed would affect people's lives, and they use some pretty serious language, you know, to identify Ryan in particular, because the idea was after this press conference, we all were going to go to Ryan's office. That was 200 people, mostly clergy, to go to Ryan's office in the Lugworth building. How many of you have been there? You know this building? It's a humongous building. And I'm glad I know about, there are 3 entrances, at least that I know of. You know, so I'm glad we used all 3 entrances, because we all got in relatively within a half an hour of getting on the line. Went up to his office. Of course, it was locked. And we went there to bring teachings from our sacred scriptures and teachers, and so when I go, of course, I represent everyone that I know. Okay, so I don't ask permission anymore. So I decided, well, we're close to Pesach, so I'll bring a Haggadah, because we all asked to bring something to give to Ryan, you know. So you have this stack, you know, of Bibles and Qurans and of, you know, Old Testament, New Testament. So and one Haggadah, I brought them, and other folks brought other teachings. A couple of women whose children's lives were saved because of Obamacare. They brought testimony to give him. Obviously, he'd probably never read it. Although we were there to, you know, and there was a vibe. There was definitely a vibe between the prayers and the talks. And who knows, you know, what effect you know, our presence there, because it was covered by a number of cameras. You can go online and take a look, you know, at the footage is there if you had time. Who has time anymore to look at these things? And so that was the other day. Heschel, coming back to Heschel, let me say a few words about Abraham Joshua Heschel. How many of you have read something, a book or some works by Abraham Joshua? What have you read? What's Judy, remember what you read? There are so many.
On the Sabbath.
The Sabbath.
Yeah.
One of his first volumes in English on the Sabbath. And maybe we'll take a little bit of a look at some of the teachings from the Sabbath. Anything else on there? Some of it, like God in Search of Man. Man is not alone. Man's quest for God. You know, amongst the You heard him speak in Starlight, Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And I have a recording from his last interview. Was with Carl Stern. Was that CBS? In 1972, shortly before he died. So maybe just to hear his voice and maybe a little bit of his teaching, you know, to bring him in a little bit. I met him in the late 60s, I guess, at the Jewish Theological Seminary, on the elevator there. You know, I thought I would just drop dead right then and there. You know, because already, you know, he was pretty awesome. What?
One way to make an impression.
One way to make an impression.
We're glad you
Thanks. I'm glad I didn't try to. And who was I with? I was with Danny Siegel. Danny Siegel, who was a student there at the time. Danny Siegel, the mitzvah man, you know. So he actually introduced me to, because I was an anti-war activist at the time at Rutgers and taking court classes at the Jewish Theological Seminary, although many of us called it the Jewish Theological Cemetery. And that's why a lot of us didn't wind up going there ultimately, because they were kind of behind the times, and Heschel got into a lot of trouble because of his political activity. So he introduces me and he shakes my hand, and he extends his hand, I shake the hand, and here, and then his Heschel handshake. And I asked Denny about it. Is that how he usually shakes someone's hand? I mean, it's not like a strong grasp. It's a gentle kind of touching, you know.
Arthritis.
Arthritis? This is a European style of shaking one's hand.
You know, they train people that shake a lot of hands not to do that, because then it really, like a president, if they shake your hand, it's like very weak, like a fish or something. Yeah. You know? And they train them to do that so they don't get...
They don't hurt themselves? Okay.
Well, they don't get arthritis or what.
No. Anyway, but you know, it was like, whoosh, I didn't wash my hand for a week. You know, that kind of, you know, aura about him was already known in certainly the late 60s. He was born in Poland in 1907. Died in 1972. Those who remember. He grew up in a Hasidic family. Some of you know this already. From a line of Hasidic masters, you know, that very, very rich. He, on one side of his family, related to Lady Yitzchak of Berdichev, you know, and on the other side of the family to a Rebbe who he was named for, Abraham Joshua Heschel of Up, and this tremendous lineage, you know, rabbinic and Hasidic lineage. He kind of left the yeshiva and Hasidic world. He was attracted to the West, and it was not for many, as you can imagine, who did take that path. It was not an easy path. And in a biography of his, I read that he sought help with a psychoanalyst, actually, whose last name was Schneerson. You know, whoa, maybe a relative of mine somewhere in there. So he went. He went to the University of studied at the University of Berlin, majoring in philosophy, and while in Berlin also studied at a liberal seminary called the Heschel, if I'm pronouncing it right in German. It's like an institute of the scientific study of Judaism. A liberal school, maybe you've heard the name Rabbi Leo Beck. You know, these are very prominent, progressive teachers, theologians. Studied with them and received a ordination through that seminary. In Germany, he worked very closely with Martin Buber. Martin Buber and Franz Rosenzweig, some of you might know the history, created the Lehrhaus. This is an adult learning center, you know, that was very popular amongst the Jewish, mostly the Jewish people. I imagine non-Jews also went there. And when Buber left Germany in 1938, it was increasingly difficult for most people to live there. Buber went to Palestine at the time and started teaching at the Hebrew University. Heschel took over the leadership of the Lehrhaus, of the Lehrhaus for Buber, but not for that long, because he too, felt the oppression, and was forced to leave. He flew. Where'd he go? He went to Poland. You know, that didn't work out for too long. So, by the skin of his teeth, he then escaped or left, emigrated to England, and from England into the United States. Most of his family died in the Holocaust. His father had already died. He was like 9 years old when his father had died from, I forget what the disease was. But most of his family, he was one of 6 children, and most of his family died in the Holocaust, and he never had a desire, never wanted to go back to Poland to visit, just because of those dark, terrible memories. Well, he went to teach for 5 years at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, all right? Okay, so 5 years, but there was something that didn't work there, and I don't remember all the details from the biography, but he was offered a position at the Jewish Theological Seminary in 1940, I think it was 47, 46, 47, and that's where he taught until he died. So at the seminary, he gathered around him a number of students, and some of them I continue to be friends with. Marshall Mayer, is Rosanna here by chance? Her rabbi from Argentina, who also then reinvigorated B'nai Jeshurun in New York when he had to leave Argentina because of his human rights activism there. He was forced to leave. He was one of the leading proteges of Heschel. Heschel was married to a woman, a concert pianist. Her name is still living, Sylvia Strauss. And in his 50s, they gave birth to Susanna Heschel. Some of you know her name, because she is a prominent philosopher, theologian in her own right, teaches at Dartmouth, and one of the leaders in the Jewish feminist movement. If you haven't read some of her works, please do so. Okay, so that's a little bit of background. How did he meet King? They were certainly aware of each other, and let's see if I can find some notes. I've been teaching Heschel recently. I did 3 weeks, 3 evenings of teaching Heschel to seniors at the Revitz house, okay? At Revitz, plus some Kehila members who came also to learn. So we went over a lot of material, and I think I'm going to do is maybe give you just a taste. It's impossible to, in one hour or so, to really just review the depth of his teachings and the breadth of his teachings. Extraordinary, just absolutely extraordinary. His daughter did write a wonderful article, and where'd it go? On his relationship with King. Here it is. It's a terrific piece, Theological Affinities in the Writings of Abraham Joshua Heschel and Martin Luther King Jr. And I imagine many of you know of that there's a famous photograph. Everyone, I think, in the world knows this photograph. You know which one I'm talking about? Okay, this is at Selma, 1965, where King and Heschel and Abernathy and a few, they are the front line, of the Selma March, which took place March 21st, just a few days ago, 1965. And Heschel hadn't planned to go down there. He was already involved in civil rights work, very much so. And but King, as the story goes, King invited him just a couple of days before. He says, "Please, we really need you to be here." And Heschel, after Shabbat, took a flight and made it. He made it down, and that was in '65. '68, they had a very, Heschel celebrated his 60th birthday at the seminary, and some of his students made a party, and they invited King to come and honor Heschel on his 60th birthday, and King did this. That was 68. And then King was invited to Heschel's Seder, Passover Seder, in April of '68. That was about 10 days after he was assassinated. The Seder, I think, would taken place like April 14th. He died April 4th. And this is all timely. Heschel's been on my mind a lot, also because of what's April 4th, because of what's going on in the country, and his amazing teachings, which we'll take a good look at in a little bit. But King's Riverside Church speech, where Heschel was present, was April 4th. The 50th anniversary is April 4th, okay? That's 1967. And there'll be a major convening at the New York Presbyterian Church here in DC to remember that speech. It was Heschel that was foremost, in bringing King into the anti-war movement, anti-Vietnam War movement. Other black leaders did not want to make that association because they felt that this would jeopardize his standing with Johnson, you see? And it would affect adversely the civil rights movement. And so he got a lot of pressure from other civil rights leaders not to get involved in anti-Vietnam War activity. But he couldn't not, you see? He could not, because the interrelationships, of materialism and militarism and racism, they're all interconnected, and there was no way that he just could not, with good conscience, not be outspoken on one and not on the other. So Heschel was significant in doing that with him. Before we talk about Heschel more, and maybe I will start with Heschel's teachings related to the civil rights movement, and because that relates most directly with what's going on now in this country, and what we're trying to do in our response group, and how to approach things. But there's also his work with Vatican II. Who remembers anything about Heschel and Vatican II? Okay, this is where a convening. Okay, by which pope was pope back then? Pope John? John the. Google, look it up. I forget which pope. 23rd? 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 Okay. So there for 4 years, there was a convening in the Vatican of scholars, to take a close look at Catholic doctrine, and to do with Latin, not Latin, this, that, but also the language, and also the relationship of the Catholic Church to other movements and to the Jewish people. And he was invited to come to help them with their language, and as a result, references to Jews as Christ killers and other anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic language was essentially eliminated from so much of church doctrine. What else? And you read more about it. That was a major, major contribution. And so a lot of folks were upset with Heschel because he would be invited to these things representing the Jewish people, but he didn't represent any particular Jewish organization. You know, he was invited because he was an extraordinary scholar, not because he represented the seminary. You know, that was no. He wasn't a member of B'nai B'rith. You know.
Kehila on the shot.
Right, he wasn't a member of Kehila. So let's start with. So here I was attracted to his teachings, partly because of his analysis of synagogue life, of where Judaism was at, in the organized Jewish community. This was the first thing that attracted, in a book called Man Is Not Alone. He writes a serious critique of synagogue, and mainstream Jewish life, and how stagnant, it had become. How unspirited, unmoving, was the experience of prayer. And those of us, many of us, one of the reasons why we are here, is because many of us, if not maybe most of us, kind of share that analysis of the synagogues and temples where we grew up. I mean, how many of you grew up in a synagogue or a temple? And all right, I'd say a little more than half. Not everybody here, but the functionality of prayer, was something that was not. We didn't take it that seriously. Many of us, growing up in mainstream synagogues and temples, it was more for the sense of community than for any real sense of prayerfulness from a deep, kind of heart space. Of course, Heschel, coming from a Hasidic background, compared to the hitlahavut or the hislavus, of Hasidic prayer, which is about a deeper sense of spirituality, ecstasy, and kavanah. He talks a lot about kavanah. What's missing, in mainstream Judaism is kavanah or kavona. Kavona is the Yiddish way of saying kavanah, the intention. Where's the deep intention, there? The organization, the edifice complex he talked about, and I made tremendous distinctions between, in places of sacred, so-called sacred space and sacred time. And he does this really well also in his book, The Sabbath, where he makes this distinction. And in fact, the Torah readings, the past 3 weeks, each of the past 3 weeks tries to teach something about that distinction between sacred space and sacred time. Now, what are we talking about? We live in, if you can imagine or think of the world being in 2 realms: space, the physical, the material world, and the spiritual world. Okay, so Heschel talks specifically about the tabernacle or the Mishkan that's described in the Torah reading in the book of Exodus the past 3 weeks. But what's happening there, you have all this energy and effort being placed into this structure to be an indwelling space for the divine spirit. Okay? This indwelling space for the divine spirit. And then, all of a sudden, right there, after a long, several parakim chapters devoted to its creation, you have the Sabbath thrown in there. How it's so important to observe or to celebrate. I forget the exact language in the Hebrew. To do Shabbat. Now, Shabbat has nothing to do with space. It's not in the physical realm. And yet it's just kind of thrown right there, right into the midst of the creation of the tabernacle. Started 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. Again, the Sabbath is there, building, doing some more building. The Sabbath, there it is, right there. And then yesterday morning, Shabbat services, once again, they finished the tabernacle on the Sabbath. Sabbath. So Heschel, no, they don't explain this stuff in the Torah. Heschel explains it in his book on the Sabbath, when he talks about, here, I'll tell you what. We're not going to read all of this because there's some other teachings that, in light of what's going on in the world, we also want to get to. But this is also very, very relevant, as you'll feel. This is the book came out in 1951. Okay, it came out in 1951. And this is just a very, very small part. Technical civilization is man's conquest of space. It is a triumph frequently achieved by sacrificing an essential ingredient of existence, namely time. Okay? In technical civilization, we expend time to gain space. To enhance our power in the world, space is our main objective. Yet to have more does not mean to be more. The power we attain in the world of space terminates abruptly at the borderline of time. But time is the heart of existence. You get a little taste of Heschel's writing style because it also is poetic. It's not a linear kind of style of writing because we're forced to stop and think, what it is that he means. He goes on, to gain control of the world of space is certainly one of our tasks. The danger begins when, in gaining power in the realm of space, we forfeit all aspirations in the realm of time. There's a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be, not to own, but to give, not to control, but to share, not to subdue, but to be in accord. Life goes wrong when the control of space, the acquisition of things of space, become our sole concern. Nothing is more useful than power, nothing more frightful. We have often suffered from degradation by poverty. Now we are threatened with degradation through power. There is happiness in the love of labor. There is misery in the love of gain. Many hearts and pitchers are broken at the fountain of profit. Selling himself into slavery to things, man becomes the utensil that is broken at the fountain. Any comments? Any thoughts about that? Okay.
Did he write in English?
Yeah, he wrote in English. Yeah, I mean he's.
I wondered if this was translated.
No. I do have some. I'd like to share with you maybe after reading this a poem. He was, for a brief period of time, he was a Yiddish poet. I mean, he was part of a Yiddish poetry group in the mid 30s, and published a book called in English it's The Ineffable Man is ineffable. Oh, I forget the name. I'll share the poem with you, and it'll become more obvious. The higher goal of spiritual living is not to amass a wealth of information, but to face sacred moments. In a religious experience, for example, is not a thing that imposes itself on man, but a spiritual presence. What is retained in the soul is the moment of insight rather than the place where the act came to pass. A moment of insight is a fortune, transporting us beyond the confines of measured time. Spiritual life begins to decay when we fail to sense the grandeur of what is eternal in time. So going back to the Torah readings the past 3 weeks, this is what the wisdom writers of the Torah are trying to get across. All this time spent on building this thing of space, the tabernacle, the Mishkan. Remember, that's not what it's all about. I mean, the purpose of the Mishkan is to help us celebrate time. To celebrate time. The Sabbath, in his book, he calls is a palace in time. The temple is a palace in space. But the Sabbath is a palace in time.
David?
Yes.
I was thinking this line, what is retained in the soul is the moment of insight rather than the place. But when there's a trauma, and we all remember where we were when such and such happened, the two come together in a way that I don't think they do normally. I mean, if the Sabbath is celebrated in a very enthusiastic way, yes, then you would remember the space and the time, but mostly it's a negative thing I think that we've experienced, in terms of everybody knows where they were when such and such a horrible thing happened, right? And it's a real impression that's burned into your your brain, which might be near your soul.
Yeah, sure. So that is connected more to, so it might be that an event will stimulate an experience in sacred time. It can be an experience of sacred time. Well, that's how he also describes Sinai. He says Sinai is an event, but it's an event that takes us to the ineffable and to eternality and to sacred time.
And what you were saying earlier about the kavanah feeling, when it's lacking, then every Shabbat is the same and it's not memorable.
Right.
But if you have an energy in the service, it changes it.
Yeah, and how to create Shabbat, how to celebrate Shabbat, so that you feel that it is transcendent, that it is, meaningful in this level of sacred time. Yes.
David, I wondered if, knowing he comes from a Hasidic background, where there's so much emotion and feeling put into the service, do you think he was trying to bring that into modern Judaism?
Yes, absolutely. He really, that's why he was so beloved, within the havurah movement and vice versa. He wasn't a member of a particular havurah. He had his own special circle, on the Upper West Side. But he inspired, because of his writing, he inspired the havurah movement, and many of his students. So he felt very close. He himself wasn't part of a movement. Wasn't part of the movement. He was and he wasn't. He was like the thought.
He wasn't
the
conservative,
philosopher.
he wasn't reform, he was...
Oh, I don't think he would have identified with any of those categories. Yeah, no, I never heard that. So he talks one more thing about, maybe on the right hand side. He talks about the Sabbath, and you can take this and reflect on it. Middle of the page. What is so luminous about a day? What is so precious to captivate the hearts? Is because the seventh day is a mine where Spirit's precious metal can be found with which to construct the palace in time, a dimension in which the human is at home with the divine, a dimension in which man aspires to approach the likeness of the divine. For where shall the likeness of God be found? There is no quality that space has in common with the essence of God. There's not enough freedom on the top of the mountain. There's not enough glory in the silence of the sea. Yet the likeness of God can be found in time, which is eternity in disguise. The art of keeping the seventh day is the art of painting on the canvas of time the mysterious grandeur of the climax of creation. As God sanctified the seventh day, so shall we. The love of the Sabbath is the love of man for what he and God have in common. Our keeping the Sabbath day is a paraphrase of the sanctification of the seventh day. What would the world be a world without Sabbath? It would be a world that knew only itself, or God distorted as a thing, or the abyss separating him from the world. A world without the vision of a window in eternity that opens into time. So this takes a lot of digestion. To create this Sabbath that he's talking about, it takes some special work, because we have to disengage ourselves from things of space, including our iPhones and our computers. And, how many of you is there any time that you all have, like when you're disengaged from technology?
I turn mine off on Saturday.
You turn yours off on
It didn't start to be about Shabbat. It started just to give myself a mental space, and when I realized it was Shabbat, sometimes I'll check, but mostly I'll just skip it, and I figure if I miss something important, I'm close.
In a way, our country has suffered because we have taken away, the weekend, where there's Sunday, for example, in Montgomery County years ago. you couldn't shop on Sunday. Stores were closed except for Orthodox Jews who were allowed to stay open on Sunday if they closed on Saturday. So it's changed the whole tempo of life in the United States. The loss of the Sunday for the Christians, in addition to Sabbath for the Jews, means that the material world is extended through the whole week, and it's really anti-biblical in a certain sense. You know, it's going back to Roman times where people worked every day, and we have people now that are working 7 days a week, day and night, to make a living. So it's a huge change in the United States.
I say it's around the world. The disease of modern civilization is that we haven't created the time.
Well, I think the Europeans still honor it more than we do, but in this country, it's become like a commercial activity continuously, day and night.
Okay. So, yes, please, Bob.
His inspiration is of finding this day and this time comes from the Lord. What does he say for those of us who don't believe in a Lord?
Okay. So it's a good question. He tries to explain that because his Lord. I mean, Lord is really a poor translation. I mean, what he calls God, the word that he uses most is that which is ineffable. He uses ineffable, that which is nameless. What is it? He sees there's a wonderful teaching. He says that in most philosophies, God is like the object. We're the subject. God is the object, and we try to prove God. We try to rationalize the existence of God. We try to, either do it or not do it. But God is the object. Where in his way of thinking. And he draws on the Torah for this and Hasidus for this, that it's not God is not the object, we are the object. Okay, we are the object, and there's the ineffable. Okay, there's a nameless mystery. Okay, that addresses us. Okay, that's some address. We have no idea. We can't explain it. It's irrational. That's where he differs from the philosophers, from Kant and the philosophers who really and going all the way back, wrestle with this. He doesn't see, he's not trying to rationalize or create a philosophy of God, because it's about, there's a reciprocity, there's an interrelationship which we can't explain. We can't really explain it, but those of us who live our lives, many of us, and tell me if this is not correct in your own thinking, we feel addressed. We feel addressed by something, by some that which is ineffable, that addresses us. Does that make sense to people on some level? Does that resonate? So maybe let me see if I can find a teaching from his that maybe can help explain this. Because he's in this realm of the poetic. It's not a rational thought. Okay. He says religion claims to be a response to a reality beyond our mind. Our minds. Okay. Let's see. Okay, in talking about God, he said there are three aspects of nature that command our attention. Its power, its beauty, and its grandeur. We may exploit it, we may enjoy it, we may accept it with awe. In modern technological society, the predominant mode of approaching the environment is for the purpose of control and use. To recover the sensitivity to that dimension is to have awareness of the ineffable. not a substitute for rational knowledge, but often it is the source of insights that can lead to the discovery of new knowledge. So when he says ineffable, he's talking about God. He's talking about God. Okay? But it's not something that is named. We don't have a name for God. We say Adonai. Let me just see if I can find something that is a little clearer. In the Bible, there's nothing there about proving there is God. God is not the object. We are the object. We discover who we are when we discover the ineffable. Okay? Man's purpose is to live in such a way that he may be worthy of being known to the ineffable. Not inevitable, ineffable. You know, what makes us worthy of existence? What makes us worthy of existence? I mean, what are the questions that we ask? Diane?
It wasn't to your question. It was more to Bob's. The thing that I don't get from the text you just read is he saying basically that that you don't even have to posit an external being, one, and two, that being addressed by the ineffable then becomes somehow that there are moments that we're moved, mysteriously moved by the grandeur of nature or by something that happens between people, but it's that experience of, that wow experience, that is that's the address from the mystery. But he's not even positing that there's a being, right?
That's right. Okay? It's not like it's not typical monotheism. It's panentheism. It's panentheism. Okay, so the ineffable, okay, the mystery, the life force exists within nature, in the physicality of nature, but also in the non-physical world as well, which is a mystery. So recognizing that, see, Spinoza, I mean, some people thought, there are people who are pantheists. God is in nature and that's it. He's a panentheist, okay? Hasidim are essentially panentheists because they feel the immanence of the divine in nature and in each person, in everything. But panentheism also sees in the cosmos, in the universe, beyond physical and non-physical. And it's a mystery. There's no explanation in the Torah. The Torah gives glimpses, of different aspects or emanations of this consciousness. But again, God is not the object. We are the object. The Torah is really for us to, the intention of the kavanah of Torah teachings, is to help us live fully, with something of this consciousness. He uses the phrase awe or radical amazement, as a nourishing force that comes from the ineffable, from the mystery of being. The world conceals and reveals God. God is within the world, present and concealed in the essence of all things. If not for God's presence, there would be no essence. If not for God's concealment, there would be no appearance. Okay, man experiences the joy of being found by, again, it's the ineffable, and also the terror of being found by the ineffable. The human predicament is also a predicament of the ineffable. This is kind of confusing because it's not rational. It's not a rational theology. His main point is that we are the object of life. Okay, we are life and we are the object. It's not that God is the object. We are the object. It's how we live. It's not how God lives. It's how we live our lives and find meaningfulness in our lives, yes.
I just need a little clarification on the word object. So is that kind of like saying we are the instrument, or is it more like we are the object, like the objective? Or do you mean it more in like the doer? A grammatical sense?
Okay, how to explain this? it's like, call it a goal, maybe the goal. We are the focus. Focus is a better word. Focus of creation. How does God? Where's God? We are instruments. We are the instruments of divine divine work in the world. You know, why do we do what we do? Why do we do what we do? It's
Seems sort of human-centered.
It is. It's deep spiritual humanism. Call it spiritual humanism. If we had more time, I'd love to. Maybe you'll see it better when we talk about some of his teachings about what's going on in the world today and how his teachings relate to the world today. Maybe that will help, because it is very hard to understand, and his books are also difficult to read because it takes a lot of thought, and you have to sit and just have the time to contemplate. And part of the problem of our lives is that we don't have the time to contemplate, so much of this.
David, could I just?
Sure. Okay, let's take a look one at a time. The Hebrew Bible calls for concern for the problem of living rather than the problem of dying. We'll see how this connects with his concept of God in a second. Its central concern is not, as in the Gilgamesh epic. You know the Gilgamesh epic? One of the early creation stories, okay? A lot of death and dying in there. Its central concern is not, as in the Gilgamesh epic, how to escape death, but rather how to sanctify life. Okay? So that's okay, right? Our existence carries eternity within itself. And we know from the second Torah blessing, it says, Chaye olam nata b'tochenu. We know our existence carries eternity within itself. He, God, planted life eternal within us, okay? So within us is eternity, okay? And within us is eternity, which also means within us is that which is ineffable. Because we can do the eternal at any moment of the will of God, dying too is doing the will of God. Just as being is obedience to the Creator, so dying is returning to the source. Death may be a supreme spiritual act, turning oneself over to eternity. Death is not sensed as a defeat, but as a summation, an arrival, a conclusion. Things of space vanish, going back to what we talked about before, space and time. Moments of time never pass away. Time is the clue to the meaning of life and death. Time lived with meaning, thus is a disclosure of the eternal. You getting it? Getting a little bit better? Unless we cultivate sensitivity to the glory while here, unless we learn how to experience a foretaste of heaven while on earth, what can there be in store for us in life to come? The seed of life eternal is planted within us here and now, but a seed is wasted when placed on stone into souls that die while the body is still alive. The greatest problem is not how to continue, but how to exalt our existence. Our greatest problem is not how to continue, but how to return. I mean, this sums up what he says about death. Does that sound new? Is it another way of understanding death? Yes?
I'm wondering whether his message and teaching here is more positive or more dystopian. In other words, if you are attuned to what he's saying about the meaning of existence, that's very positive. If you don't get it, then that's a very dystopian view, or very negative.
No, you're right. If you don't get what he's talking about, it's difficult, or if you find it confusing or frustrating, that's not helpful. He doesn't want to put people in a worse position than they're already in this world. Here, getting more to his civil rights or his social justice concern. While still in I believe it was maybe England or in Europe, he very much became involved with rediscovering the Hebrew prophets. And he found at the core of his appreciation for life and his own purpose in life, a great direction from the Hebrew prophets. And this became much more manifest in the 1950s, 1960s especially. His book, 2 volumes called The Prophets, came out in the 1950s and influenced a whole generation of civil rights activists, including King. So here, these teachings, we'll see how they resonate. God, the ineffable, seeks out him or her who is pursued from Ecclesiastes, even if the pursuer is righteous and the pursued is wicked, because man's condition is God's concern. Again, we are the object. We're not the subject. It's not coming from us. We think, we conceptualize, but on the level of the mystery and the ineffable, the concern is coming from something much, much grander than our minds can comprehend. To discriminate against man is to despise what God demands. From Proverbs, he who oppresses a poor man insults his maker, but he who is kind to the needy honors him. This is from Proverbs, Mishlei, okay, from the Hebrew Bible. The way we act, the way we fail to act, is a disgrace which must not go on forever. This is not a white man's world. This is not a colored man's world. It is God's world. No man has a place in this world who tries to keep another man in his place. It is time for the white man to repent. We have failed to use the avenues open to us to educate the hearts and minds of men, to identify ourselves with those who are underprivileged. That could be spoken today very easily.
What about oppressive women?
Well, you can include that. Just include.
Stand on egalitarian.
Yeah,
Where did you stand on egalitarian issues?
Today he's totally, he's 100%. Today. You have to understand that he, if the issue were raised and when he was alive, it wouldn't be an issue because women would be included. Wherever it says man, it would be man and woman. Okay?
Well, I just wondered because you talked about that he taught at JTS and that was, conservative movement wasn't egalitarian at that point.
No, that's why a lot of us, his students, left. Okay? We left the conservative movement because it was not egalitarian, it was not anti-war, it wasn't engaged in the real world. So we left. And if he would have lived longer, he would have left too. Absolutely. His daughter was his greatest student. Oh, no, she wasn't. That was Mordechai Kaplan. Who he was close with, even though they didn't have the same ideas about God. They were very close at the seminary. They were both kind of on the outs. But his daughter becomes one of the foremost Jewish feminist theologians. Where did she get this from? And so anyway, so you have to, in the context of the times, I feel it's safe to make assumptions. If he were living today, he would embrace the LGBTQ. He would totally be embracing, everyone who was created in the image of the divine, and that's everyone. Absolutely, he'd be so involved. One of his students, although he didn't study with him, Arthur Waskow, who heads up the Shalom Center, he's been in the forefront in social justice movements, anti-war movements, is in the forefront of the environmental, activist movement, and it's because of Heschel's teachings that he's embraced that. If Heschel were alive today, he would absolutely be in the forefront of that movement as well as a theologian. How could he not? Judy, would you read number 66?
Which Judy? Me?
This Judy.
Okay.
Couple Judys.
Racism is an evil of tremendous power, but God's will transcends all powers. Surrender to despair is surrender to evil. It is important to feel anxiety. It is sinful to wallow in despair.
Okay. Any thoughts about that?
That's from the basis right now of the activist movement.
Right. The basis of the activist movement today is not to go to that place of despair. That's buying into the darkness, buying into these evil, evil forces.
David, though, can I ask, what does it mean up here where he says, God seeks out him who is pursued, even if the pursuer is righteous and the pursued is wicked? I mean, like, are we pursuing Trump? Wouldn't you say we're pursuing?
Oh, where's the, which
The
number?
very top one, number 64.
God seeks out him who is pursued. God seeks out him who is pursued, even if the pursuer is righteous.
It's the undocumented people who are
Oh.
being pursued.
The
Even
undocumented.
if the pursued is wicked. Who's wicked? I mean, in our view, not the undocumented, but the pursued. We are pursuing Trump, are we not?
Well, anyway, seeks out him who is
So
pursued.
is God on Trump's side? Because
No, of course not.
He doesn't want
How do you understand this?
pursued.
That's exactly.
Even if the pursued is wicked, God is on the side of the pursued.
No. Okay. Yeah. Well, what does that mean?
Don't pursue the wicked, pursue the truth and the good. That needs
Right.
Listen, in the Torah, when it says that the Pharaoh's heart is hardened, God, who hardens Pharaoh's heart? It's God. It says God hardens Pharaoh's heart. If you take seriously the concept of, the life force exists in everything and in everyone, and the life force consists not just only the good, but also that which is evil. Then what's happening? Then it's the question of how do we respond? How do we respond? Pharaohs, even pharaohs their hearts can be changed. You see, Pharaoh. You think of, you take.
I have thought of this. In other words, if you want to use Trump as the person here, but it could be anyone you feel is doing evil, rather than pursuing them or directly insulting them. Do what is right and good that will be in opposition to what they're trying to achieve, and don't focus your energies on the evildoer. On the evil deed.
Focus on
to ameliorate what is being done.
Right. So what are the real pharaohs? The pharaohs of racism, the pharaohs of greed, the pharaohs of sexism, the pharaohs. Those are the pharaohs. The fact that to come down on another human being, as evil as that person is, that individual is also a reflection of, is created in the divine image. So therefore, what do we do? Do we then go to that level of hatred for that individual? Do we become hateful, and try to conquer that individual, that person, or do we try to conquer the pharaohs of racism? Why is that individual like that? Why is that person like that? So, in fact, I was at a meeting the other night in Northwest D.C. off of Connecticut Avenue near the Avalon, a group called Huddles. And I'll talk more in detail about it tomorrow night and share with you some of the information. This is a group, it's kind of like Indivisible. This community group got together and talk about how to respond. Very much like what we're doing. How to respond. It's a community group. And they divided into two groups because they didn't agree within the group. Some people wanted to do more immediate action. Sounds familiar? More immediate action, to go lobby, whatever. They had more of a focus. Now it's gonna. And the other group was like, they wanted to think about it more, really get to some of the root causes of what's going on. So this group has been, this is the third time that they met, and I met the leader, the organizer of the group at a showing of the film Disturbing the Peace, which is about Israelis and Palestinians, fighters, Palestinian fighters, Israeli soldiers getting together and deciding that they're not going to fight each other anymore, and they're going to work to create a different vision, okay, a different society. And so I met her there, and she invited me to this meeting. So I went to the meeting. What are they working on? Her group is working on language. It's the language of discourse in Congress, specifically in Congress. They're taking their lead from Gingrich. Gingrich, who in 1994 came up with a vocabulary for the Republican Party. I totally was not on my radar. Came up with the way that Republicans had to speak about liberals, progressives, all those folks out there, environmentalists, all the, how their language had to be in unity, okay, to gain power, So she said, well, the Democratic National Committee doesn't have a common language, as they've discovered, doesn't have a common language like this. And what should their common language, if they had a common language, if they didn't have the language of blame and putting down and, and hateful, and didn't fight everything, they had a different approach through different language, then maybe they would be able to regain the Congress. There are so many Americans who are disgusted with the electoral process and with people who are, and the language. Even I went to a gathering with Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren and Jamie Raskin and a few others at the Civic Center. Some of you were there, I think, right? A few months ago, and it was what was it? It was a rally, a Democratic Party rally. And the language coming out, it was the us and them language. Us and them. They are evil. We are good. Yes. The us and them, right. Okay. The us, and a lot of folks, see the world this way. Us and them. And she sounded like, like a hyper brilliant teenager up there on the, on the stage. You know what I mean? I mean, brilliant, but like a teenager. And so this was brought up at the meeting, how many congressional leaders in the Democratic National Party, elsewhere, they were focusing on the Democratic National Party and how that party needs to get its act together in going forward, and the kinds of changes that are needed, through just starting with language. And then we got a discussion, well, language is one thing, but you have to feel it. You really have to feel the change in your heart. You just can't start using another vocabulary unless you really feel it. So they have a lot of work to do before people can start using another language. You see what I'm saying? This is what Heschel I think, is talking about. And we see how Lashon Hara in the Jewish tradition, how Lashon Hara, the misuse, abuse of language, evil use of language, can be so destructive in society. We see this. This is what the Republicans have been doing, and the leadership, and the misinformation, the lies, and it's coming from, also from the Democratic side too, at times, maybe not on the same level. You listen to some of the late night, the shows at night, what are they called, MSNBC and Rachel Maddow, and there's a lot of arrogance. Have you picked up on the arrogance? I have a really hard time watching, as Diane knows, and I usually fall asleep after 5 minutes because I tune out.
It's either that or commentary.
Or I do my own commentary. They're just as bad. They're just as bad as the other side. Then I'll go listen to Hannity for a couple minutes, and I say, gosh, it sounds very similar. There's a similar kind of uncivil discourse going on here, and it's disgusting. And there are millions of Americans, I really believe, and they were saying at this meeting, the Huddles meeting the other night, that there are millions of Americans, who can't stand this, and they would vote for a party that changed their language.
What would it sound like, David? What would this other language sound like? Work together.
Come Monday night, I'll share with you the words. And they're interested in our feedback. I told the Huddle group about us, okay? It's a much nicer name, Huddle, We should call ourselves Cuddle. Cuddle. Cuddle, women cuddle.
I sort of became aware of this years ago through Trevor Noah and The Daily Show, because they showed how, some little phrase got picked up and used repeatedly by every single reporter. And that was when I first became aware of this. And this is the concept of the meme, that you put a meme out there, a new idea that goes viral, and then everybody uses it and it becomes normal. And I think that's the problem, is the normalization of this horrible language of abuse and bullying, which starts in, we know where it starts. I mean, it's everywhere, but it starts up there at the top at the White House, of ignorant word use. And I think it's a huge problem. And but the idea of the meme, that you get a word and you get it out there, and then it becomes just part of the vocabulary, and nobody all of a sudden sees how destructive or dangerous or mean-spirited it is. And I think it's a huge issue. So although, they might not need to do a whole new vocabulary, I think it's a problem. One of the words that always gets me is oversight, because in the old days, oversight meant watching over and supervision. Now it also, in addition, it also means overlooking. So you can go either way. We have oversight over this, or we're showing oversight and we're not paying attention. And there's some words that have double meanings that are the opposite of each other.
Or there's a death tax instead of an inheritance tax.
A death tax, right?
Yeah.
No, but there are other words like cleave, which means hug, but also cut in half.
Oh.
That one, execute, I thought of that the other day. We're going to execute this bill. Does that mean you're going to kill it, or you're going to carry it out? And I think some of these big words we could get in would be a little bit better, but not the double meaning words.
Judy, and then Carol.
And it's not only the use of vocabulary and the repetition of short phrases. It's the means of discourse. And it all started with a lot of these shows where people started shouting at each other. And the one who shouts the loudest is the one who gets their message across. And there used to be rules of discourse. These are disappearing. And also, in journalism, it used to be anything on the front page had to be factual, not opinion, and that is gone. So to separate what is at least attempted fact from what is an individual's opinion now is almost impossible to discern. Whether it's something you hear on a television show, a news broadcast, or reading on the front page of the paper.
Somehow this needs to be addressed. Carol, then.
One of my favorites that I'd like to get rid of, so I know that's one of those couple options, is battleground states. We don't need to be in a battle with each other. We don't need to be at war with one another. Call them shoulder states. Call them side states. Call them something, but stop talking about battle. It sounds like it's apocalyptic, and how are we going to work together in a battle against each other?
Right. Barbara.
The other phrase that I think is very important in thinking about all of this is echo chamber. That people have become very used to listening and talking only to the people who use that same language, who agree with them. And that is something that liberals have been as guilty of as conservatives. That there are certain things that are just accepted without any challenge in discourse because it's being said by the people who are saying the same kinds of things that you say. And that's something that liberals also have to get out of.
Thank you. Let's move a couple of other really wonderful quotes here from Heschel. Number 67, what we need is a total mobilization of heart, intelligence, and wealth for the purpose of love and justice. What a radical idea, huh? God is in search of man, waiting, hoping for man to do his will. This comes back to the idea that we are we're the object, we're the motive, not the motive. What was the word? There was a focus. We're the focus. We're the focus. God is us. What we face is a human emergency. It requires much devotion, wisdom, and divine grace to eliminate that massive sense of inferiority, the creeping bitterness. It will require a high quality of imaginative sympathy sustained cooperation both in thought and in action by individuals as well as by institutions, to weed out memories of frustration, roots of resentment. Okay? We have to stop, okay. The rest you can, on your own, okay, enjoy. Yeah, there's some really, yeah, and with Pesach coming up, just number 79, and we'll cut it. It is not enough for us to exhort the government. What we must do is to set an example, not merely to acknowledge, now here it says the Negro, but we can put in the immigrant. We can put in the other, right. But to welcome him or her, not grudgingly, but joyously, to take delight in enabling him or her to enjoy what is due him or her. We're all pharaohs or slaves of pharaohs. It is sad to be a slave of Pharaoh. It is horrible to be a pharaoh. Let there be a grain of profit in everyone. All right, this is a lot of stuff, and I know that some folks are not satisfied with the God stuff here, but I have his poem here, one of the poems that he read in Yiddish. That might help. That might not help. But if you'd like a copy of his poem, it's in Yiddish, but also translated. I'd love to share it with you. Thank you. Thank you.